Hi boys, so yesterday we looked at the behavioural management approach and we compared that to the classical approach. Today we're just going to have a really short presentation looking at the contingency management approach. So as you can actually see here at the bottom, we've got the contingency approach, and this approach is basically taking the best of these two and morphing them into one, or adapting the approach to whatever's happening in the current circumstances of the business. Now this continuum here of leadership, what we can see in the pink section here is that this is where you've got the classical approach, and this is where it's boss-centered leadership, and then look, we've got the autocratic approach here. But on the right-hand side, this is where we start seeing that it's subordinate-centered. Subordinate means worker-centered, and this is where we have a laissez-faire situation, and you might come across that term, but that means a more relaxed environment. Now, the only thing that you need to be mindful in this approach, the contingency approach, and I think this is one of the approaches that's most used these days because situations in the company also change regularly. Now, this approach stresses the importance that different businesses face different situations constantly. This approach also requires flexibility so that the management can quickly adapt to the changing circumstances. And if I'm looking at the example of COVID and what the businesses are facing now, they've had to adapt to these changes. So we're seeing businesses changing what they're making in their business. You know, they might now make face masks, or they might make hand sanitizer. So they've had to adapt very quickly to the situation that's happening. An example of a changing circumstance could be the unexpected entry of a new competitor or imposition of a new tax. So let's say a new competitor comes out and you're not necessarily prepared for that. You need to quickly change things, or maybe you need to speed up the process. If a new tax comes out as well, now if you've got to pay tax as a business, you might find that you ensure that maybe your prices go up because someone's got to pay for that tax. You don't necessarily want to do that. Requiring the business to develop a contingency plan in order to cope with the new circumstances. Now, there's an example here of the GFC, which was the global financial crisis. And what happened there, a lot of businesses had to think, hang on a minute, we're going to put our expansion plans on hold. We're going to have to get rid of some of our staff. Access to funds might actually become restricted, which means that banks are not really going to give money out because the consumer confidence has fallen. So these plans that we're seeing now with COVID and businesses, this is exactly what we're going through. Businesses have had to get rid of and retrench some of their staff. They're not able to get a lot of money because the banks are thinking, well, these people might not actually pay me back. So I'm a little bit cautious about giving these businesses money. Now, this slide here just looks at the 10 commandments of the modern manager. So what a modern manager should actually look like. And we've spoken about a few of these over the last couple of lessons. Now, just like we looked at the advantages and disadvantages of all the other approaches, we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of the contingency approach. Now, the advantages are that it acknowledges the impact of changes in the business environment and enables businesses to be more flexible in reacting to change. And managers have to be mindful of how are they actually going to do this, and are they going to be able to be flexible? And remember when we were looking at the skills of management, flexibility is a really big one. Another advantage is it recognises that there are multiple approaches to management and there is no one best way, and that's absolutely true. The classical is not better than the behavioural and vice versa. It also recognises that different situations demand different approaches. And I said to you before that in a school situation where we've got, the headmaster making decisions, sometimes the headmaster will make decisions on our behalf, and other times he'll allow us to have a little bit more say. So it just depends on what the situation is. Now, the disadvantages to this approach are adapting to constant changes in the business environment can be challenging for management. Now, I think every single school at the moment and our executive team, they're going through so many changes that they're not necessarily struggling, but they're battling with what is the right decision and what's going to make most people happy. Another disadvantage is the process of selecting alternative courses of action, depending on the situation, can be costly in terms of time and money. And this is where you've got to chop and change things. So you might not have the opportunity to look at what's going to be the best for the business, but you might have to spend a little bit more money, which could be detrimental. Now, you have a Canvas activity, and I've just put it up here for you to have a look at. And this is about adapting to changing circumstances. So how do you actually manage change effectively to make sure that everybody is on board with the change, but everyone's also happy with the change, and I guess have less anxiety with this change, because with change comes a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of people might feel taken aback a little bit, and they might not feel that they can do the best job. Now, like I said, this is not a very long PowerPoint presentation, because the contingency approach is a combination of the classical and the behavioural approach, depending on what the circumstances are in that time. So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you in class.